Let's now try and get some animation into this project. Firstly, let's try and create the flip effect. When a player tries to guess a word, each of these tiles flip over one by one in a sort of domino effect, revealing whether the letters have been answered correctly. So firstly, in the tile widget, let's animate these tiles so they spin around on the x-axis. So the first thing to getting our animation up and running is creating an animation controller, which will drive this animation. So up here, I'll create an animation controller, and I'll use the late keyword. Whenever we use an animation controller, we should sync this up with a ticker. So up here in the class definition, in the state class, I'll write with to mix it in with a single ticker provider state mixin, because we have one animation controller, so we can just use a single ticker. Now in the init state, let's initialize this controller. So animation controller, set this equal to an animation controller. And to sync this up, I just write vsync this, and now our ticker here will now sync up with our animation controller. We also need to set a duration for how long the animation will run. So under the duration property, I'll use the duration class, and let's set that at 500 milliseconds. We can update that later as we need. Now whenever we create an animation controller, we should dispose of the object when we don't need it. So that's easy. Down here we have a dispose method on the state class, and we can just call animation controller.dispose, and that'll do all the work for us. Okay, cool. So we now have our animation controller set up. Now let's actually set up the animation. So here on the widget, let's wrap the top of it with a transform widget, which will help us transform this widget in a heap of ways. So by using the transform property, we need to then write matrix4.identity. Now what we can do to access the different properties is we can use the cascade notation, ... and now we can change this widget in a heap of different ways. So in this case, we want to flip it around on the x-axis. So we'll select rotate x, and now we need to pass in the angle that it will rotate around. So here we can pass in animation controller .value, because animation controller will produce a value from 0 up to 1 during the life of the animation. So over the 500 milliseconds, this will spit out a value from 0 to 1, and we can use that to update our animation every frame. And because we want this to flip around, we'll times the value by pi, and now we need to import dartmath. Okay, awesome. So we'll now flip this object on its x-axis, and we're going to do that based on the value the animation controller produces times pi. Now to actually have this running as an animation, we should wrap this in an animated builder. And the animated builder will actually rebuild this every animation frame and give the appearance of an animation running. So first of all, we should change the child to a builder. And I'll update this to a block body so we can write some code in here shortly. And then we need to set an animation, and here we can set the animation controller, which will drive this animated builder and tell the animated builder to keep running while we're animating. And also I've set the alignment to center, because we want this to flip over the center of these grids. So now next step is, let's see how this looks. So we need a way to kickstart the animation. To do that, I'm going to create another variable of type bool. We'll name this animate, and we'll set this to false initially. Up here, where our index is less than the tiles entered list, so this is where the user has entered in a letter to the grid tiles, I'll set animation controller and use the dot forward to run this animation forward from 0 to 1. Now let's see how this looks. Hot restart. P-I-Z-Z-A. Okay, cool. So we're almost there. We have the grid tiles flipping over, but we have two problems. One is the letters are now back to front, and also they're flipping over as we key in the letters. So let's fix those two problems. So firstly, let's change this so when these letters flip over, they're facing the right way. So down here, we're rotating on the x-axis by pi. So we're actually only rotating halfway. So we could write times 2 to do a full rotation. And now let's see how that looks. And we're the right way, but that doesn't have the effect that we're looking for. So we won't times pi by 2. Another way around this is we can create another variable, and this can be of type double, and we'll name this flip, and we'll set that at 0. Then we can check when the controller is 50% through animating, we can change the value of flip. So if animation controller dot value is greater than 0.5, i.e. it's more than 50% through animating, then flip, we can set that to pi. So the letter flips back and will face us. And then down here, we can use the cascade notation, and here we can select rotate X again and pass in flip. So now, when we flip over, at 50%, so flip will suddenly change to pi, and now the letters should face us. So let's see how that looks. Okay, cool. So that is working. Now we can also add a little bit of depth to this to give it a slight 3D effect. We can do that by using the set entry, and here pass in the values 3 on the row and 2 on the column. And now we can pass in a value here. Let's see how that looks. So that's a huge depth. So let's make that smaller. Let's say 0.03. Okay, cool. So I think that's about right. So that's adding just a little bit of subtle depth to the rotation to give it a bit of 3D effect. Next up is we'll stagger the animation so it runs with a domino effect.